The scream echoed through the old wooden house like thunder. "Why would you do this to me, Richard?" Grandma's voice cracked, trembling with pain that seemed far heavier than her frail body could carry. She clutched her chest as if his words had pierced her heart deeper than any blade ever could. Richard, the man she had loved for more than half her life, stood at the doorway with a face as cold as stone. His silence spoke louder than any answer he could give, and when he finally opened his mouth, the words that fell crushed her spirit. "You were never enough for me, Margaret. Never." Those words sliced through her soul. It wasn't a knife in her body, but in her heart, and it left a wound no doctor could heal. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks, but Richard didn't turn back. He walked out, leaving her with a shattered heart and a silence so heavy it almost swallowed her whole. And just like that, the love she thought would protect her forever became the very thing that destroyed her. That was the night Grandma learned that love, when betrayed, cuts deeper than any knife. But how did it come to this? How did a woman who once danced under the moonlight with the love of her youth end up abandoned in her old age? To answer that, we must return to the beginning, when she was just a young girl with a heart full of dreams. Margaret grew up in a little village where life was simple but beautiful. She was known for her laughter that could brighten the darkest day. Everyone loved her, but none loved her more than Richard, the charming boy with brown eyes who promised her the world. Their love story began under the mango tree near the riverbank, where Richard first held her hand and whispered, "I'll never let you go." She believed him with all her heart. First, life was sweet. They shared meals, built a home together, and raised children with love. Margaret was sure she had found her forever. But slowly, cracks began to show. Richard changed. The gentle man who once wrote her poems now returned home late at night, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Still, Margaret held on. She believed love could heal anything. She worked harder, cooked his favorite meals, and prayed he would see her again the way he used to. But instead, the more she gave, the more he drifted away. Then came the whispers in the village. Whispers of another woman. Whispers Margaret tried to shut out. Until one night, the whispers turned into truth. That was the night Richard finally told her she was never enough. Margaret's world collapsed, but her story didn't end there. Her pain became her strength. Her betrayal became her teacher. And the lesson she learned that night would change the way her children, and even her grandchildren, understood love. But before we reach that lesson, before we uncover how she stood tall again after being broken, there is something darker you must know. For the betrayal didn't end with Richard's words. Something far worse was waiting at the door of her life, ready to break her even further. It was the night after Richard left. Margaret thought the worst had already happened, but what came next was even more terrifying. The night after Richard left, Margaret sat in the quiet house, the ticking clock sounding louder than her heartbeat. She had cried until her eyes felt like burning stones. But even tears refused to come anymore. She thought she had seen the worst part of betrayal. She thought the pain of losing Richard's love was the deepest wound she would ever carry. But then bang! The front door burst open. Margaret jumped, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. Standing in the doorway were two of Richard's brothers, their faces twisted with anger. One of them, George, shouted, "Where is he? Don't you dare pretend you don't know where Richard is hiding." Margaret's heart raced. "He left me," she whispered. "I don't know where he went." But they didn't believe her. George stepped closer, his finger pointing at her face. "You drove him away with your nagging. You ruined his life, Margaret. You—" He stopped himself, his words heavy with hatred. The other brother, Samuel, kicked a chair so hard it broke into pieces. The sound made Margaret flinch. She felt like a prisoner in her own home. And in that moment the betrayal cut even deeper. Not only had Richard abandoned her, but his family, who once laughed and ate at her table, now treated her like she was poison. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them everything she had done to keep Richard's love alive. But her voice was trapped inside her chest, silenced by the fear of what they might do next. Finally, after what felt like forever, the brothers left, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Margaret sank to the floor, her body trembling. She thought, if love could do this, maybe love is nothing but a trap. But she wasn't completely alone. Upstairs, her daughter Anna had been awake the whole time, listening to the shouting. When she crept down and saw her mother broken on the floor, she wrapped her small arms around her. "Mama," Anna whispered, "please don't cry anymore. You still have me." Those words were like a small candle in the dark. For a moment, Margaret remembered that even in her storm, she had something worth holding on to, her children. In the weeks that followed, Margaret tried to rebuild her strength. She went to the market, baked bread for the neighbors, and sang songs to Anna and her brother James at night. But no matter how hard she tried, the whispers in the village only grew louder. Women who once called her sister now turned their backs. Some even laughed behind her as she walked past. Betrayal wasn't just in her home anymore, it was in the streets. Still, Margaret refused to give up. She told herself, if Richard's love could cut me this deep, then maybe my children's love can heal me. She poured everything into Anna and James, making sure they had food to eat, clothes to wear, and stories to smile about before bed. But life had more storms waiting. One afternoon, while Anna was playing by the river, Margaret heard screams. Children came running to her house shouting, "Anna! Anna fell in the water!" Margaret's heart stopped. She dropped the basket she was carrying and ran faster than her legs thought possible. Her eyes searched the rushing water, her voice breaking as she cried, "Anna! Anna!" And then, she saw a small hand struggling above the waves before it disappeared beneath. The river roared like a wild beast, swallowing everything in its path. Margaret's feet splashed through the shallow edge as she screamed her daughter's name. "Anna! Hold on, my child!" But there was no answer, only the sound of rushing water. A neighbor, Thomas, jumped in, fighting against the current. His strong arms cut through the waves as he dove again and again. Margaret stood at the edge, her hands shaking, praying aloud, "Please, Lord, please don't take her from me too." Then, like a miracle, Thomas emerged, gasping for air with Anna in his arms. Her little body was limp, her hair plastered to her pale face. Margaret's heart dropped. She fell to her knees as Thomas laid Anna on the sand. "Breathe, Anna. Please breathe," Margaret cried, pressing her hands against her daughter's tiny chest. She shook her, begged her, wept over her. For one horrible moment it felt like time stopped. And then cough. Water spilled from Anna's mouth as her chest heaved. She coughed again, gasping for air. Margaret screamed with relief, hugging her so tightly she could barely breathe. Tears poured down her face as she whispered, "Don't you ever leave me, Anna. Don't you ever scare me like this again." The villagers who had gathered clapped and praised Thomas for his bravery. But even as Margaret carried her shivering daughter home, a dark thought followed her like a shadow. What if I had lost her too? First Richard and then Anna? How much pain can one heart take? That night, Margaret sat by Anna's bed, holding her hand as she slept. The moonlight slipped through the window, painting the room silver. She thought back to her younger days, to when love was still pure, when she believed Richard would protect her forever. She remembered their wedding day, how he had lifted her veil with trembling hands and whispered, "You're my forever." But forever had ended too soon. The next morning, Margaret woke up to another wound she didn't see coming. A letter had arrived. One she wished she had never opened. It was from Richard. His handwriting was still familiar, but his words were colder than ice. "Margaret, do not look for me. I've found a new life, and it is not with you. You will never see me again. Forget me." Her hands shook so badly that the letter slipped from her fingers. Anna found her mother staring at the floor, her face pale, her lips trembling. "Mama, what is it?" Margaret forced a smile, but her voice cracked as she whispered, "Nothing, child. Just nothing." But deep inside, she knew it was something that cut her deeper than any knife. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's body carried on, but her soul dragged behind. She went to the market, sewed clothes for her neighbors, and tried to live as if the letter had never come. But each night, when the children were asleep, she sat alone, whispering to the empty walls, "Why, Richard? Why was I never enough?" Her strength came from her children, yet life was far from done testing her. One evening, as James ran back from school, his face was pale, his voice shaky. "Mama," he cried, "they said Papa is back, and he's bringing her here." Margaret's heart froze. Her chest tightened. Could it be true? After walking out, after shattering her heart with that cruel letter, Richard was coming back. Only this time with the woman who replaced her? And worse, he was bringing her into the very village where Margaret lived. The whole village buzzed with whispers before Richard even set foot in it. Neighbors huddled in corners, pointing at Margaret's house, waiting to see how she would react when the man who had once called her forever walked back with another woman by his side. James's words kept echoing in her ears. Papa is back, and he's bringing her here. Margaret's chest burned. She wanted to scream, to tell her children it was a lie, but deep inside she knew it was true. That night, sleep refused to come. She sat by the window, watching the road with fearful eyes, every sound of footsteps making her heart jump. By morning it happened. The sound of horses pulling a cart echoed down the path. Children ran to the roadside, curious. Margaret, holding Anna's hand tightly, stepped outside. And there he was, Richard. But he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman dressed in bright clothes, her smile sharp like a blade. Her hand rested proudly on his arm, as if she owned what was once Margaret's. The crowd stared, murmuring. Richard stepped down first, his eyes brushing past Margaret as if she were a stranger. No warmth, no shame, nothing. Then he helped the woman down, placing his hand on her back in a way that once belonged only to Margaret. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It was walking boldly in the daylight. Anna's small voice broke the silence. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes wide with hope. She tugged at Margaret's hand, but Richard didn't even look at his daughter. Instead, he turned to the villagers and said, "This is Clara. She will be staying with me." Margaret felt the ground sway beneath her. The love she had built her life on had not only abandoned her, it had returned to humiliate her. The villagers' eyes darted between Margaret and Clara. Some gasped, others smirked. To them this was drama. To Margaret, it was the knife twisting deeper. Later that evening, when the house was quiet, Anna cried, "Mama, why didn't Papa talk to me? Why didn't he hug me?" Margaret pulled her close, hiding her tears in her daughter's hair. "Because, my love, sometimes people forget what truly matters. But you will never be forgotten. Not by me." Days passed, and Richard built a new life with Clara as if Margaret and the children never existed. They walked hand in hand through the village, laughing loudly. Clara even wore Margaret's old earrings, gifts Margaret had once treasured from Richard. Each time Margaret saw them, her chest tightened. Still she endured. She cooked for her children. She told them stories at night. She smiled when she wanted to cry. But deep down, she wondered, how long can a heart carry so much pain before it breaks completely? One evening, as Margaret was returning from the market, she heard Clara's laughter near the riverbank. Richard's voice followed, playful, loving, the kind of voice he once used only for her. Margaret froze, the basket slipping from her hands. Her heart screamed louder than her voice ever could. And then she heard Clara say something that made her blood run cold. "Richard, why don't you just send her away? She's still here, holding on like a ghost. As long as she's in this village, she will never let us live in peace." Richard's reply came without hesitation. "Don't worry. I already have a plan." Margaret's legs froze where she stood, hidden behind the tall reeds by the river. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but those words cut through the evening air sharper than broken glass. "Don't worry. I already have a plan." Her heart thudded so hard she thought the villagers across the river would hear it. Send her away? What did Richard mean? Where would he send her? And why, after taking everything, her love, her peace, even her dignity, did he still want more? Margaret pressed her hand against her mouth to stop the cry rising in her throat. She couldn't let them know she was there. Slowly, quietly, she turned back, her feet dragging her toward home. Each step felt heavy, as though she were walking deeper into a nightmare. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every shadow on the wall looked like a threat, every creak in the wood like a whisper of doom. She remembered Richard's words from long ago. "I'll always protect you." The irony burned in her chest. The man who once promised to guard her life was now plotting to erase her from it. The days that followed were filled with fear. Whenever Margaret fetched water, she felt the eyes of villagers following her. Whenever she sold bread in the market, she heard the gossip. "Richard will drive her out," someone whispered. "He doesn't want her here anymore." Her children noticed her silence. Anna tugged at her skirt one evening. "Mama, are you sad because of Papa?" Margaret knelt down, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. "No, my love. Mama is just thinking of how to keep us safe." But inside she was drowning. A week later, Richard's plan revealed itself. Men from the village council came knocking at Margaret's door. Their faces were stiff, their voices cold. The oldest among them, Mr. Lawrence, cleared his throat and said, "Margaret, we've been told you are bringing shame to this community. Richard says you're refusing to let go, clinging to what is no longer yours. He wants you out of this village." The words struck like lightning. Margaret clutched the doorway to steady herself. "This is my home," she whispered. "I raised my children here. I've done nothing wrong." But the councilmen only exchanged uneasy glances. "We're not here to argue," Mr. Lawrence said. "We're here to warn you. If you don't leave quietly, things may not end well." When they left, Margaret shut the door and leaned against it, her whole body trembling. Betrayal had turned into something far more dangerous. It was no longer just words or whispers, it was power being used to crush her. That night she broke down. She cried into her hands, her sobs shaking the walls. Anna and James held her tightly, their small voices begging, "Please don't cry, Mama. We're here. We'll never leave you." And in that moment, Margaret remembered something her own mother once told her. "When the world turns against you, your children can be the rope that keeps you from falling." She wiped her tears and made a silent vow. If Richard wanted her gone, he would have to fight more than just her broken heart. He would have to fight the fire that burned inside a mother. But even as she made that vow, fate was already moving against her. The next morning, Anna didn't return from school. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, but Anna's small footsteps were nowhere to be heard. Margaret stood by the doorway, her eyes darting down the dusty path where children usually returned from school. Other children had already passed, laughing and skipping home, but Anna was missing. Her chest tightened. She whispered to herself, "Maybe she stayed behind to play, maybe she's with a friend." But even as she spoke, her heart pounded faster. Anna never stayed late without telling her. Never. When darkness began to crawl over the village, Margaret's fear broke into panic. She grabbed James by the hand and rushed toward the school. Her sandals slapped the ground hard as she called out, "Anna! Anna!" Villagers turned their heads, watching, whispering. At the small schoolhouse, the teacher frowned at her worry. "She left hours ago, Margaret. She should have been home by now." The words stabbed her heart. Margaret ran through the fields, searched the riverbank, shouted her daughter's name until her voice cracked. James trailed behind, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mama, where's Anna? Did something happen to her?" Margaret forced herself to stay strong for him, but inside, she felt like the ground had opened beneath her. By midnight, lanterns lit up the village as neighbors joined the search. Some carried sticks, some carried lamps, their voices calling out into the night. But Richard was not among them. Margaret noticed. He had not lifted a finger, not even pretended to care. When she finally gathered courage to knock on his door, Clara opened it with a sly smile. "Looking for your little girl?" she asked sweetly. Maybe she finally realized she doesn't belong here, just like her mother. Margaret's eyes widened. Her body trembled with rage and fear. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. But Clara only shrugged, closing the door in her face. The night dragged on, heavy with silence and dread. By dawn, Margaret's legs could barely carry her. But she refused to stop searching. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes red and swollen. And then Thomas, the neighbor who once saved Anna from the river, came rushing toward her. "Margaret," he panted, his face pale. I think I found something by the forest path." Her heart almost stopped. She followed him, every step a prayer. "Please God, don't let it be what I think. Please let her be safe." When they reached the path, Thomas pointed to the ground. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. There, lying in the dirt, was Anna's small red ribbon, the one she always wore in her hair. But there was no Anna, only the ribbon, torn and dirty. Margaret fell to her knees, clutching the ribbon against her chest. A scream ripped from her soul, echoing into the trees. "Anna!" And then from the distance, A child's faint cry floated through the forest air. The faint cry pierced the stillness of the forest. Margaret's head shot up, her eyes wide. "Anna!" she screamed, stumbling to her feet. She gripped Thomas's arm, dragging him toward the sound. The branches whipped against her face as she ran, her heart pounding louder than her footsteps. Again the cry, weak, trembling, but real. "Mama!" Tears blurred Margaret's vision. She pushed through the thorns and tall grass until, at last, she saw her. Anna sat on the ground, her knees scraped, her dress torn. Her small hands were tied with a rough rope. "Anna!" Margaret fell to her knees, pulling her child into her arms. She sobbed as she untied the rope, kissing her daughter's cheeks again and again. "I'm here, my baby. Mama's here." Anna clung to her, shaking. "Mama, they took me." Margaret froze. But Anna only buried her face in her mother's chest, trembling too hard to answer. Thomas looked around the forest, his jaw tight. "We need to leave before whoever did this comes back." He glanced at Margaret, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "And I think you already know who it was." Margaret swallowed hard, her mind flashing to Clara's sly smile, Richard's cold eyes, the council's threats. Rage burned in her veins, but fear held her tongue. What if speaking the truth only made things worse? They carried Anna home, and Margaret tried to soothe her with warm soup and lullabies. But that night, when Anna finally whispered what she remembered, Margaret's blood ran cold. "It was a woman's voice, Mama," Anna said, her eyes wet with fear. "She told me Papa doesn't want me anymore, and that soon you won't be here either." Margaret's body shook with fury. Clara. It had to be Clara. Only she could say something so cruel. Only she could twist the knife deeper into wounds that were already bleeding. The next morning, Margaret marched to Richard's house, holding Anna's ribbon tight in her fist like a weapon. Clara opened the door, smiling sweetly as though nothing had happened. Margaret's voice thundered. "If you ever touch my daughter again, I swear." But before she could finish, Richard stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold. "Enough, Margaret. Stop blaming Clara for your failures. If Anna ran into the woods, that's your fault as a mother." Margaret's jaw dropped. Her voice broke. She was tied up. She could have died. Richard shrugged, his indifference cutting deeper than Clara's smirk. "Not my problem." The villagers who had gathered nearby whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in pity, others nodded in agreement with Richard. The weight of their stares pressed down on Margaret until her knees nearly buckled. But deep inside something was changing. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, it was no longer just breaking her. It was hardening her, sharpening her into something stronger. She walked away, her children by her side, her mind set on one thought. If no one will protect us, then I must protect us myself. That night, as she tucked Anna and James into bed, the sound of footsteps outside her window made her freeze. Shadows moved against the wall and then, the window shattered. The crash of breaking glass tore through the night like thunder. Margaret leapt from her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. Anna and James screamed from their beds upstairs. Shards glittered on the floor as two dark figures forced their way inside. "Who are you?" Margaret shouted, grabbing the iron poker from beside the fire. Her hands trembled, but she lifted it high. "Get out of my house." The intruders didn't answer. One lunged toward her, but Margaret swung the poker with all her strength. It struck his shoulder, and he stumbled back with a grunt. The other figure cursed under his breath. "Grab the children," the second one hissed. Margaret's blood turned cold. "No," she cried, rushing toward the stairs. But the first intruder blocked her path. His grip was like iron, his breath foul. She struggled, scratched, kicked, her body fueled by nothing but fear and fury. "Anna. James. Stay upstairs. Don't come down," she screamed. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Thomas, her neighbor, stormed in with a lantern. "What's going on here?" he barked. The intruders froze, then bolted toward the shattered window, vanishing into the night like shadows. Margaret collapsed against the wall, shaking so badly she could barely breathe. Thomas rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her voice cracked. "They wanted my children. They were going to take them." Upstairs, Anna and James clung to each other, their eyes wide with terror. Margaret gathered them in her arms, rocking them as tears streamed down her face. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not while I'm alive. But as she held them, she knew deep in her bones that this was not random. This was no accident. This was Richard's plan. If he couldn't drive her out through shame, he would break her through fear. The next day, Margaret went to the council, her hands still trembling as she told them what had happened. But instead of help, she was met with silence. Mr. Lawrence, the head of the council, only sighed. Margaret, there is no proof of what you're saying. You mustn't accuse Richard without evidence. Her heart sank. Evidence? My window is shattered. My children nearly taken. But the men only exchanged glances, their faces stiff, their loyalty clear. Richard's shadow hung over all of them. Margaret walked out of the council hall feeling smaller than she ever had. Yet even in her despair, a new fire flickered within her. If the village would not protect her, then she would protect herself. She began to plan quietly, secretly. She taught James to stay alert, to notice strange faces. She taught Anna never to wander alone. At night, she kept the iron poker close to her bed. Fear lived in her house now, but so did courage. Still, the betrayal pressed heavy on her heart. The man she once trusted with her life was now the reason she could not sleep. The love that once gave her joy had become her greatest danger. But just when Margaret thought she had prepared for everything, another blow came. One evening, as she returned from the market with bread in her basket, a small crowd gathered at the village square. Whispers rose like smoke. Faces turned toward her with pity and curiosity. At the center of it all stood Richard, holding James by the wrist. Margaret's basket slipped from her hands, bread rolling across the dusty ground, but she didn't care. Her eyes locked on James, his small wrist gripped tightly in Richard's hand. Papa, let me go, James cried, twisting and pulling, his eyes wide with fear. But Richard's hold only tightened. Margaret rushed forward, her heart hammering. Richard! What are you doing with my son? Richard turned slowly, his face calm, too calm. Clara stood behind him, her lips curled into a smirk. The villagers watched in silence, their whispers rising like buzzing bees. Richard's voice was smooth but sharp. Your son is mine, Margaret. My blood runs in his veins. I've decided he belongs with me now. You can keep the girl, but the boy comes with me. The world spun. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. No, she gasped, stepping forward. You can't take him from me. You left us. You don't get to choose now. James struggled, tears spilling down his face. Mama, don't let him take me. Margaret lunged, grabbing her son's other arm. He stays with me. Her voice cracked, but her grip was firm. The square grew tense. Villagers shifted uncomfortably, caught between pity and fear of Richard's power. Clara laughed softly, the sound like poison. Look at her, clinging to what isn't hers anymore. Pathetic. Richard's jaw tightened. He yanked James toward him, but Margaret pulled back with all the strength of a desperate mother. For a moment it looked as if James would be torn in two. Let him go, Richard. Margaret screamed, her voice breaking. If you ever loved your children, let him go. But Richard's eyes were cold, void of the man she once knew. Love? He spat. Love is weakness. And I've had enough of weakness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret's heart shattered. This was not the man who once promised her forever. This was a stranger wearing his face. Thomas suddenly stepped out from the crowd, his voice steady. Enough, Richard. You've shamed her enough. Leave the boy. Richard's head snapped toward him, anger flashing in his eyes. Stay out of this, Thomas. This is my family. Thomas didn't flinch. Then act like a man worthy of them. For a moment silence fell. Margaret's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She prayed, begged inside her heart, please God, don't let him take my son. And then, with a violent shove, Richard pushed Margaret backward. She stumbled, crashing onto the dirt. James screamed, reaching for her. Margaret's vision blurred, but she saw it. Richard dragging James toward his cart, Clara trailing behind with a smile of victory. Margaret scrambled to her knees, dirt clinging to her dress, pain shooting through her body. She screamed with every ounce of strength left in her. Richard, if you take him, you will regret it for the rest of your life. But Richard didn't look back. He threw James into the cart, climbed in beside him, and with a sharp crack of the reins, the horses pulled away. Margaret ran until her legs gave out, her cries echoing across the village. The dust swallowed the cart, and with it, her son. Margaret collapsed in the dust, her hands clawing at the ground, as if she could pull the cart back by sheer will. Her cries tore through the village, raw and broken. James! James! But the boy was gone. The villagers stood frozen, some whispering, some shaking their heads, but none stepped forward to help her. Clara's laughter still rang in Margaret's ears like the cruelest song. The man she once called husband, the man she once trusted more than her own breath, had ripped half her heart away. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Anna curled into Margaret's arms, whispering, "Mama, when is James coming back?" Margaret kissed her daughter's hair, but her silence was the only answer she could give. Tears soaked her pillow as she thought of her boy, alone, scared, trapped in the house of a man who had chosen cruelty over love. But Margaret was not broken. Not yet. By dawn, she rose with a fire in her eyes. For too long she had been silent, swallowing her pain. But no more. If Richard thought he could destroy her, he was wrong. A mother's love was stronger than his betrayal, stronger than his power, stronger than his lies. She went to the council hall again, this time not to beg but to fight. She stood tall before them, her voice steady. "You watched him steal my son in broad daylight. You stood silent while my family was torn apart. But I will not be silent anymore. If you will not bring him back, then I will." Her words shook the hall. Some of the men avoided her eyes, ashamed. Others frowned, angry at her defiance. But Margaret no longer cared for their approval. She gathered allies, Thomas, who had always stood by her, and a few villagers whose hearts still remembered justice. Together, they went to Richard's house. When Richard stepped outside, James standing pale and frightened behind him, Margaret's eyes locked on her son. "James, come here," she called, her voice trembling with love. Richard's hand gripped the boy's shoulder, firm, possessive. "He's mine now. Leave before I make this worse for you, Margaret." But this time Margaret did not back down. She stepped forward, her voice rising, stronger than it had ever been. "No, Richard. You lost me the night you betrayed my love. You lost this family the day you chose cruelty over kindness. You may have my children's blood in your veins, but you will never own their hearts. They are mine, and I will not let you break them like you broke me." The villagers, drawn by the confrontation, gathered around. Whispers rose. Some nodded, some gasped. The truth was now out in the open. James's small voice broke the silence. "Mama, I want to go home." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Richard's face twisted with rage. But in that moment he realized the truth. No matter how tight he held, no matter how much power he claimed, love could not be forced. It was already gone from him. Slowly, James tore away from his father's grip and ran into Margaret's arms. She fell to her knees, holding him and Anna together, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, her heart felt whole again. Richard stood frozen, Clara's smirk fading into silence. The villagers' eyes bore into them, judgment heavy in the air. Without a word, Richard turned and walked away, Clara trailing behind like a shadow. Margaret rose, clutching her children close. She had lost everything once, her husband, her peace, her dignity. But in the ashes of her pain, she had found something far greater. The strength of a mother's love, unshaken and unbroken. She looked at her children, her voice soft but steady. "Listen to me, Anna, James. Love can be beautiful, but when it turns to betrayal, it cuts deeper than a knife. Never give your heart to someone who doesn't treasure it. Promise me you will remember this." The children nodded, their small hands clinging to hers. And as the sun set behind the village, Margaret walked forward. Not as the broken woman Richard tried to destroy, but as a survivor, carrying scars that would teach generations to come. For though love had wounded her, it had also taught her the greatest lesson of all. True strength is not found in who loves you, but in how you rise when that love is taken away. Margaret's story was not just about betrayal. It was about survival. She had loved deeply, only to be cut by the very person she trusted most. The wound bled, the scar remained, but she rose again. Her children grew up not in the shadow of their father's cruelty, But in the light of their mother's strength, Anna became gentle yet wise, never forgetting the warmth of her mother's arms. James, once almost stolen away, grew into a man who valued loyalty above all things. They both carried with them the lesson that love must never be confused with possession, and trust must never be given to someone unworthy. Margaret never remarried. Some said it was because she was afraid to love again. But the truth was simpler. She had already given her heart once, and though it had been broken, she chose to pour the rest of her love into her children, her community, and herself. In the years to come, people spoke of her not as the woman Richard betrayed, but as the woman who stood tall when love cut deepest. And when she sat with her grandchildren by the fire, she would tell them softly, "Love is a gift, but if you give it to someone who doesn't cherish it, that love can cut deeper than a knife. Guard your heart, my little ones, and when you love, love with courage, but also with wisdom." Her eyes would shine, not with sorrow anymore, but with peace. For though betrayal had once broken her, it had also shaped her into something stronger. A woman who could not be destroyed. And that, in the end, was her true victory.